The Coalition fleet hung in the darkness beyond the Valkyrie border like a wall of steel and fire. Hundreds of warships gathered in a formation that promised destruction on a scale the galaxy had not seen in generations on the other side. Valkyrie war fleets emerged from hidden positions throughout their territory, their organic vessels pulsing with energy weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been broken. Two civilizations stood ready to tear each other apart over the fate of one human soldier who had never asked to be rescued. Yuna arrived at the border zone aboard a Valkyrie transport, with an escort of warriors who remained pointedly visible to Coalition sensors, their presence both protection and message. She had demanded a channel to broadcast on all frequencies, and the Queen Mother had provided technology that would carry her voice to every ship on both sides simultaneously. "This is Sergeant Yuna Park of the Coalition Peacekeeping Forces," she announced, her voice steady despite the terror churning in her stomach. "I am not a prisoner, I am not a hostage, and I am asking everyone to lower their weapons and listen." The response from Coalition Command was immediate and skeptical. "Sergeant Park, this is Admiral Chun of the Coalition 4th Fleet," a harsh voice replied. "We have reason to believe you are speaking under duress, and we are prepared to extract you by force if necessary. With respect." "Admiral, I am speaking of my own free will," Yuna answered. "And I have something to show you that might change how you see this situation." She activated the visual feed that the Valkyrie had helped her prepare, broadcasting images across every screen on every ship on both sides of the border. The footage showed her journey through Valkyrie territory, not the edited propaganda version that either side might have created, but raw and honest documentation of everything. She had witnessed warriors standing guard over nurseries with the same protective intensity that human parents showed for their children, workers tending larvae with careful attention and obvious love that transcended species barriers, communities gathering to share meals and stories and bonds that looked nothing like the cold hive mind that Coalition intelligence had always described. And finally, the image of the Queen Mother holding Ziktai after days of uncertainty, an ancient ruler reunited with her only child through the actions of an enemy soldier who had simply refused to let that child die alone. "I found their princess wounded in a crashed transport," Yuna explained while the footage played. "I could have left her there. I could have turned her over to our military as a bargaining chip. I could have done what protocol demanded and walked away." She paused, letting the images speak for themselves as soldiers on both sides watched in silence. "Instead, I picked her up, and I carried her home. And I learned something that none of our intelligence briefings ever told us." Her voice cracked slightly before she continued. "They are not monsters. They are parents, and they have spent centuries believing that we could never understand that about them, that we would always see them as enemies to be feared and fought. I am standing here as proof that we can be better than their expectations, that we can choose compassion over conflict, that we can see each other as people rather than threats." The silence stretched across the void between the fleets. Thousands of soldiers processing information that contradicted everything they have been taught about the enemy they faced. "I am not a hero," Yuna said firmly. "I am just someone who picked up a scared kid and refused to put her down. And that is something any one of you would have done in my place if you had seen what I saw." She took a deep breath before making her final appeal. "So, I am asking you, all of you on both sides of this border, to stand down. Because the war we are about to fight is based on lies we told each other and ourselves about who the enemy really is." The response came not from Admiral Chun or Coalition Command, but from a ship in the Valkyrie formation that moved forward through the defensive lines, a royal transport Yuna recognized from her time in the capital. And she felt hope surge in her chest as she guessed who was aboard. The Queen Mother's voice echoed across the same frequencies Yuna had used. Her sounds translated by technology that had never before been shared with. Humans, this human speaks truth that my people have needed. To hear for longer than her species has traveled among the stars, the ancient ruler declared. She walked into our territory, expecting death, and instead showed us something we had forgotten was possible. She showed us trust on the coalition side. Something was shifting as soldiers who had been ready for war began exchanging uncertain looks and lowering weapons that no longer seemed necessary. Admiral Chun spoke again, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. Sergeant Park, are you absolutely certain that you are acting of your own free will and that you wish to prevent military action? Absolutely certain, sir, Yuna confirmed. Then I'm ordering the fleet to stand down, Chun announced. And across the formation weapon systems began powering off while soldiers released breaths they had been holding. The Volcari followed suit, their war fleets withdrawing to defensive positions rather than attack. Formations while communication channels that had been closed for decades suddenly opened, but Yuna's attention was captured by something else entirely. By the royal transport that had moved between the fleets and was now opening its boarding doors. A small figure appeared in the doorway. A Valkyrie larva with iridescent wings that were finally beginning to form and compound eyes that scanned the gathered ships until they found one specific human face. Ziktai had recovered. Yuna realized with tears streaming down her face. The healers had saved her. The larva spoke in sounds that Yuna's translator had learned to recognize. The unique speech patterns of a child who had named a human soldier as family. But this time, Ziktai also spoke in standard. Words she had learned during their journey together that she had been too weak to use until now. Mom, Ziktai said, her voice uncertain but clear enough for everyone to hear across the broadcast. I'm home. The Queen Mother appeared beside her daughter, one massive limb resting gently on the larva's shoulder while she looked across the void toward Yuna. She has two homes now, the Queen Mother announced to both fleets. One with her birth family among our people, and one with the human who carried her through darkness when no one else would. If humanity is willing, I propose we begin learning what that means together. Admiral Chun responded after a long moment of consideration, his voice thoughtful rather than suspicious. On behalf of the coalition, we are willing to try. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy watched in amazement as the most unlikely peace. Negotiation in history began between species who had feared each other for centuries, and at the center of it all was a human soldier who had been offered a choice when everything settled. Returned to coalition space as a hero celebrated across 1,000 worlds, or remain as the first human ambassador to the Valkyrie Dominion. Yuna looked at Ziktai, who was watching her with those compound eyes that still fractured her reflection into dozens of tiny images. And she remembered a frightened child reaching toward her in the ash forest. Some choices, she realized, were made long before the question was asked. I think I will stay, she said. And Ziktai made that sound like breaking glass mixed with birdsong that Yuna had learned meant joy. The Queen Mother nodded as if she had expected nothing else. Then welcome home. Warm, safe person, the ancient ruler said. We have much to learn from each other, and I suspect my daughter will not let you go easily. Yuna laughed for the first time in weeks, looking out at the stars where two fleets had nearly destroyed each other and where now ships from both sides were beginning to mingle in patterns that looked almost like conversation. Some borders, she said quietly, thinking of everything that had brought her to this moment, were never meant to exist. The Queen Mother heard her and responded with something that might have been agreement or might have been amusement. Perhaps, the ancient ruler said. Or perhaps they exist only so that someone brave enough can show us how to cross them. Yuna considered this while Ziktai pressed against her side with the comfortable familiarity of family. And she decided that some questions did not need answers. What mattered was what came next. Two species learning to see each other clearly for the first time, one small step after another, until the borders that had divided them became nothing more than lines on old maps that no one remembered why they had drawn. It would not be easy, she knew. And there would be setbacks and conflicts and moments when the old fears threatened to return. But it was possible now in a way it had never been before. And that possibility had started with something simple: a soldier picking up a scared child and refusing to let go. The end was just another beginning. And Yuna was ready to see where it would lead. The throne chamber of the Queen Mother was vast beyond anything Yuna had imagined. A cathedral of living crystal that seemed to stretch upward forever into darkness, that even the bioluminescent walls could not penetrate. Thousands of Valkyrie filled the space. Nobles and warriors and workers all gathered to witness something that had never happened in their recorded history. A human standing before their supreme ruler. The Queen Mother herself dominated the far end of the chamber. Ancient and enormous, and radiating a presence that Yuna felt pressing against her mind like a physical weight. She was 3 times the size of her largest warriors, her exoskeleton adorned with patterns that glowed from within, and her compound eyes held depths of intelligence and power that made Yuna's knees want to buckle. But she kept walking forward with Ziktai held carefully in her arms, ignoring the hostile sounds that surrounded her from the gathered nobility. Her translator struggled to process the cascade of communication happening around her, picking out fragments like accusation and suspicion and demand and trap and human trick and execute immediately. They believed this was some elaborate deception. She realized some scheme to infiltrate their capital through false mercy and manufactured rescue. A warrior stepped forward from the crowd and spoke in sounds that resonated through the chamber like thunder. And Yuna's translator offered a partial rendering. This creature has violated our sacred territory and touched our heir daughter with its unclean hands, the warrior declared. The punishment for such crimes has been death since before the stars knew their names. Others joined the chorus of condemnation, their sound blending into a wall of hostility that made Yuna want to curl into a ball and hide from the hatred directed at her. But she had not come this far to surrender now. Not with Ziktai's life fading with every passing moment. She approached the Queen Mother until guards moved to stop her, accepting their restraint without resistance while holding the larva up so the ancient ruler could see clearly. She needs you, Yuna said, her voice small and strange in this place of alien power. Not me, not politics, not whatever you think is happening here. She needs her mother. The Queen Mother stirred on her throne, and the movement sent ripples of silence through the assembled crowd as everyone waited to see what would happen. She descended from her elevated position with a grace that seemed impossible for a creature her size, moving through her subjects while they parted before her like water before a stone. When she reached Yuna, the Queen Mother lowered her massive head until those endless compound eyes were level with the tiny human who had dared to enter this sacred place. The translator tried to process the sounds the Queen Mother made, producing fragments that suggested questions about identity and purpose and motivation. But one question came through clearly, cutting through all the background noise and hostility and suspicion. Why? The Queen Mother asked, and the single word carried weight that made the air itself seem heavy. Yuna looked up at this being who commanded billions, who held the power of life and death over entire worlds, who had never shown mercy to any outsider in recorded history, and she gave the only answer that mattered, because she was scared. Yuna said simply, her voice steady despite the tears that ran down her face, because she was alone. Because she was hurt, because I can help. The Queen Mother was silent for a long moment while her subjects held their breath, and Yuna waited for judgment. Then the ancient ruler reached down with limbs that could have crushed Yuna without effort. And she took Zigtai from the human's arms with a gentleness that seemed to surprise even herself. The larva stirred at her mother's touch, some spark of awareness returning to those compound eyes that had been empty for days. And she made a weak sound that needed no translation recognition. Yuna understood. A child knowing that she was safe at last. The Queen Mother called for healers in sounds that shook the chamber, and Valkyrie in white markings rushed forward to take Zigtai towards some inner sanctum where they could fight for her survival. But the Queen Mother did not dismiss Yuna or order her killed or even return to her throne. Instead, she remained standing before the human soldier who had walked alone into enemy territory, carrying the most precious treasure of the Dominion. "You speak truth," the Queen Mother said slowly, her sounds becoming clearer as the translator adjusted to her specific patterns. "I see no deception in you, only something I believed impossible for your kind." "What is that?" Yuna asked, exhausted beyond measure, but unable to look away from those ancient eyes. "Love," the Queen Mother replied. "Love for one who is not your own. For one your species has called enemy since first contact. Love strong enough to overcome fear and reason and self-preservation." The gathered nobility had fallen completely silent now, watching an exchange that was rewriting everything they believed about humans and their capacity for compassion. "My daughter named you," the Queen Mother continued, surprising Yuna with the revelation that news of her journey had reached the capital ahead of her. "She called you warm, safe person. And that naming carries weight in our culture that your people cannot understand." "What kind of weight?" Yuna asked carefully. "She has claimed you as family," the Queen Mother answered. "And we do not abandon our family, even when they come from impossible places." Before Yuna could process what that meant, a new commotion erupted at the chamber entrance. A messenger burst through the crowd with urgent sounds that made the gathered Valkyrie shift in sudden alarm. And Yuna's translator caught fragments that made her blood run cold. "Coalition fleet." The words reported mobilizing at border, demanding return of human prisoner, threatening invasion if refused. "War imminent. Your people believe you are being held against your will," the Queen Mother said, turning back to Yuna with something that might have been sadness in her ancient eyes. "They are coming to rescue you with weapons drawn and threats spoken." Yuna felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. The realization that her choice to save one child might now cost millions of lives on both sides. The war that everyone had feared was hours away from becoming reality, and she was standing at the very center of it. "They do not understand," Yuna said desperately. "They cannot understand what happened here, what I saw in your people, what I learned about who you really are." "No," the Queen Mother agreed. "They cannot. And so they will come with fire and death to save someone who does not wish to be saved." The chamber erupted in urgent discussion, as warriors prepared for battle and nobles debated strategies that would end with bodies on both sides, and Yuna stood alone among aliens who had shown her more kindness than she had expected, watching the galaxy slide toward destruction. Because humans and Valkyrie had never learned to see each other clearly, unless someone stopped it, unless someone found a way to make both sides understand what she had learned in her journey. Through enemy territory, the Queen Mother was watching her, and Yuna realized that the ancient ruler was waiting, hoping perhaps that this strange human, who had already done the impossible, might find a way to do it again. "I need to talk to them," Yuna said, the desperate plan forming even as she spoke. "I need to show them what I saw here, what I learned about your people. Before anyone fires the first shot." "They will not listen," the Queen Mother replied. But there was no rejection in her tone. "Maybe not," Yuna admitted. "But I have to try, because my people deserve to know the truth. And so do yours." The Queen Mother considered this for a long moment while the fate of billions hung in the balance. Then she made a decision that matched the one Yuna had made in the ash forest days ago. Choosing trust over fear and hope over certainty, you will have your chance, the Queen Mother declared, and the chamber fell silent at her words. Go, speak to your people, and show them what you have shown me. Yuna bowed her head in gratitude and turned toward the chamber exit where Valkyrie warriors were already preparing an escort that would carry her to the border faster than any human technology could manage. Behind her, she heard the Queen Mother give one final command. If she fails, prepare for war, but pray that she succeeds. Because I find myself hoping that she is right about her kind. Yuna walked out of the throne chamber, carrying the weight of 2 civilizations on her shoulders, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether peace was possible or whether everything she had done would be remembered only as the beginning of the end. The border between Coalition space and the Valkyrie Dominion was marked by ancient warning beacons that screamed at any approaching vessel. But on foot through the mountains, there was only silence and knowledge that death waited on the other side. Yuna crossed that invisible line at dawn with Ziktai wrapped against her chest in a makeshift carrier, fashioned from her tactical vest. The larva too weak now to move on her own, or even acknowledge their surroundings. Her squad had followed her until the final ridge, but she had ordered them back before the crossing, refusing to let them throw away their lives for a choice that was hers alone to make. You are insane, Sujin had told her with something like admiration in her voice. And I hope someday someone writes songs about what you are doing. Now Yuna walked alone through alien territory, her weapons abandoned at the border, because she knew they would only guarantee her death. And she felt the weight of Ziktai against her heart with every step. The Valkyrie landscape was different from the ash forests of the border zone, featuring crystalline formations that rose from the ground like natural sculptures and vegetation in colors that human eyes struggled to process correctly. She saw structures in the distance that could only be hive buildings, towering organic shapes that seemed to grow from the earth rather than being constructed upon it, and she felt eyes watching her from every direction. Knowing that Valkyrie warriors had already spotted the impossible sight of a lone human walking through their sacred territory, the first patrol found her within 2 hours. 3 warriors descending from the sky on wings that hummed with frequencies she could feel in her bones. Each of them stood 3 meters tall, with exoskeletons like polished obsidian and compound eyes that regarded her with what might have been curiosity or hunger or simple mechanical assessment. They carried weapons that her intelligence training identified as molecular disruptors, capable of reducing a human body to its component atoms in less than a second. Yuna stopped walking and held perfectly still while the warriors circled her, their wings creating a wind that carried strange scents of chemicals and pheromones that made her eyes water. Then she did the only thing she could think of, dropping slowly to her knees and holding Ziktai forward so the warriors could see what she carried. Child, she said in standard, hoping her tone would convey meaning where words could not. Returning, please. She had practiced that phrase for hours during the journey, using her translator to learn the basic Valkyrie words, and then discovering that human vocal cords could not produce most of the sounds required, so she spoke in her own language and prayed that something would translate across the void. Between species, the warriors froze when they saw the royal markings on Ziktai's shell, and the sounds they made to each other were too fast and complex for Yuna to follow even partially. One of them approached her with deliberate steps that shook the ground beneath her knees, lowering its massive head until those compound eyes were level with her face. She saw herself reflected in those eyes, a tiny human kneeling in the dirt with a dying alien princess in her arms. And she wondered if this was the last thing she would ever see. But the killing blow did not come. Instead, the warrior made a sound that her translator rendered as something like Question, confusion, demand, explain. And Yuna realized she might live long enough to speak. She was hurt. Yuna said slowly and clearly, still holding Ziktai forward like an offering. I found her, and I could not leave her. So I brought her home. The warriors exchanged more rapid communications while Yuna waited with sweat running down her back. Despite the cool mountain air, then they formed around her in an escort formation and gestured for her to stand and walk. And she understood that she was not being taken to her death, but somewhere far more significant. They traveled for days through Velkari territory, and Yuna witnessed things that no human had ever seen and likely would never see again. She saw nurseries carved into mountainsides where workers tended thousands of larvae with careful attention that matched any human parent. She saw warriors standing guard over those nurseries with the same protective intensity she felt for Ziktai. And she realized that these were not the emotionless insects described in Coalition intelligence reports. She saw communities and families and bonds that transcended the cold analysis of military briefings. The Velkari were not monsters. She understood with growing certainty. They were simply alien in ways that humans had never bothered to truly comprehend. And they loved their children just as fiercely as any human mother or father loved. Their Ziktai's condition worsened as they traveled, the larva's breathing becoming shallow and irregular, while her body grew cooler. Despite Yuna's constant efforts to share warmth, the warriors noticed and increased their pace, carrying Yuna through sections of the journey. When her human legs could not move fast enough, she found herself cradled in the arms of a Velkari warrior who moved through the landscape like flowing water. And she held Ziktai close while alien hands held her with surprising gentleness. By the third day, the larva had stopped responding to Yuna's voice entirely, her compound eyes open, but seeing nothing while her small body struggled to continue existing. Please hold on, Yuna whispered constantly, her voice growing hoarse from endless pleas, to a child who could not hear her anymore. We are almost there, I promise. Just a little longer. The capital hive appeared on the horizon like a mountain made of living crystal, rising so high that its peak disappeared into the clouds above structures and spires, and bridges covered its surface in patterns that seemed random until Yuna realized they formed a massive symbol that her translator could not fully interpret. Something about unity and eternity and the bonds between all Velkari stretching back to the beginning of their species. The escort warriors announced their arrival through sounds that echoed off the crystalline walls, and responses came from everywhere at once. A symphony of alien voices welcoming them home. They entered through gates that could have admitted a starship and walked through corridors that glowed with bioluminescence in colors Yuna had never imagined, and finally they stopped before doors that dwarfed everything she had seen before. Massive panels of living crystal that pulsed with inner light like a heartbeat. The Queen Mother awaits, one of the warriors said in sounds her translators struggled to process. You will answer to her for what you have done. The doors began to open, and Yuna looked down at Ziktai one final time, adjusting the larva in her arms and preparing to face whatever judgment awaited. She had carried this child across a border that should have been impossible to cross. Now she would see whether that journey meant salvation or death. The throne chamber of the Queen Mother opened before her, and Yuna walked forward into destiny. The cave system in the Kethis Mountains had served as a shelter for refugees during the worst years of the border conflicts, and now it served as hiding place for Yuna and her squad while Velkari search parties swept the forests below. The larva had stopped trembling hours ago, but its wound continued bleeding that strange copper-colored fluid, and Yuna could feel its body growing weaker as she held it close to share her warmth. Sergeant, We need to talk about this situation, Minjin said quietly, sitting across from her in the dim light of their emergency lanterns while the others kept watch at the cave entrance. Yuna did not look up from the larva, using a torn piece of her uniform to apply pressure to the wound that refused to close properly despite her efforts. "Talk then," she replied, her voice carrying an edge that warned him to choose his words carefully. Minjin hesitated before pulling out his datapad and showing her something that made her blood run cold. Despite the cave's natural warmth, I ran the markings on its shell through our database, he explained, pointing to the intricate patterns that decorated the larva's back and head. "These are royal identifiers, Sergeant, and they match only one individual in our records." Yuna looked at the screen, where a name appeared in harsh red letters alongside detailed intelligence about the Volcari, Dominion's ruling family, heir-daughter Ziktai, only offspring of the Queen Mother herself, hatched 3 cycles ago and considered the most protected individual in the entire Dominion. "This is the princess," Minjin said unnecessarily, and his voice carried both wonder and terror at what they had stumbled into. Sujin appeared at his shoulder, having abandoned her watch post after hearing the news through their shared channel. "Do you understand what this means?" she demanded, looking at Yuna with wild eyes that reflected the lantern light like small fires. "We have leverage over the entire Valkyrie Dominion, and we could end this conflict overnight if we play this correctly." "She is not leverage," Yuna said firmly, adjusting her hold on Ziktai when the larva stirred weakly in her arms. "She is a wounded child who needs medical attention we cannot provide." The argument continued in harsh whispers while the larva drifted in and out of consciousness, and Yuna found herself increasingly isolated as her squad discussed options. That turned her stomach. They could contact Coalition Command and turn the air over as a diplomatic asset. They could negotiate directly with the Valkyrie and demand concessions in exchange for the safe return. They could use this situation to force a permanent peace treaty on terms favorable to humanity. Each suggestion treated Ziktai as a tool rather than a living being, and Yuna felt something harden inside her chest with every word. "Enough," she finally said, cutting through another debate about negotiation strategies with a voice that brooked no argument. "None of that matters if she dies before morning." The truth of her statement silenced the others, and they all looked at the larva, whose breathing had become shallow and irregular. Human medics knew almost nothing about Valkyrie biology, which had been deliberately kept secret by the isolationist Dominion for centuries. Yuna had no idea what the creature needed to survive, no way to treat its wound properly, no understanding of what might be killing it beyond the obvious injury, but she refused to watch a child die in her arms regardless of species or politics or galactic consequences. "Get me the medical kit," she ordered, already running through possibilities in her mind despite her lack of knowledge. "And someone find the emergency rations, especially anything with high protein content." The next hours became a desperate experiment as Yuna tried everything she could think of to keep Ziktai alive. She used heat packs to maintain the larva's body temperature, noticing how it responded positively to warmth and guessing that Valkyrie required higher temperatures than humans. She offered nutrient paste that the creature initially refused before hunger overcame its suspicion, and she watched carefully for any signs of adverse reaction. She cleaned the wound as best she could and applied a coagulant designed for human blood that seemed to slow the copper bleeding. After several agonizing minutes of uncertainty, through it all, Ziktai watched her with those compound eyes that fractured her reflection into dozens of tiny images. And something like understanding seemed to grow between them despite the absence of shared language. When the larva finally spoke, Yuna did not recognize the sounds as words at first, thinking they were just more distress calls or pain responses. But Ziktai repeated the same pattern several times while looking directly at her. And Yuna reached for her translator unit with trembling fingers. The device struggled to process Valkyrie speech, which relied on frequencies and harmonics that human ears could barely detect. But eventually, it produced a result that made tears well up in Yuna's eyes. No direct translation found, the device reported. Closest approximation. Warm, safe person, protector of small things. She dash who dash gives dash comfort. The larva had given her a name in its own language. And that name meant something like family. I'm going to get you home, Yuna whispered, stroking the smooth shell of Ziktai's head with gentle fingers. I promise you that. Little one, a priority signal from Coalition Command interrupted the moment, blaring through their communication equipment with urgent codes that demanded immediate response. Sergeant Park, you are ordered to maintain position and await extraction, the message announced in the clipped tones of military protocol. The asset you have recovered is of extreme strategic importance, and High Command will be deploying a specialized team to secure it within 6 hours. Asset, Yuna thought bitterly, looking down at the child in her arms who had just named her as a protector. They want to use her, Minjin said quietly. And for the first time, his voice carried doubt rather than tactical consideration. The diplomats and generals will turn this into another piece on their game board, and she will probably die before they figure out how to keep her alive, Sujin added, surprising everyone by moving to stand beside Yuna rather than arguing for compliance with orders. Yuna made her decision in that moment, knowing it would end her career and possibly her freedom if she survived what came next. I am taking her home, she announced, rising carefully to avoid jostling Ziktai while her squad stared at her with various expressions of shock and concern. To her real home, not some coalition holding facility? That is treason, Minjin pointed out. But his voice was more sad than accusatory. Maybe, Yuna acknowledged, wrapping Ziktai more securely against her chest and gathering supplies for a journey into enemy territory. But she called me family, and I will not betray that trust for politics. She disabled her tracking beacon and destroyed her official communication equipment, becoming invisible to coalition forces in one decisive moment. Then she walked out of the cave and into the darkness of the Kethis Mountains, carrying the Valkyrie heir toward a border that no human had ever crossed alive behind her. She heard Minjin sigh and Sujin curse softly, and then she heard footsteps following her into the night. Her squad had made their choice as well. They would face the consequences together. The ash forests of Kethis 4 stretched endlessly under a gray sky that never seemed to clear, and Sergeant Yuna Park led her patrol through the dead trees with her rifle ready and her senses sharp. This border world had seen too much war between the Galactic Coalition and the Valkyrie Dominion, and the ceasefire that humans maintained here felt as fragile as the blackened branches that crumbled beneath their boots. Sergeant, I am picking up wreckage approximately 2 kilometers northeast, Corporal Minjun Cho reported through the comm unit, his voice crackling with static from the atmospheric interference that plagued this region. Yuna raised her fist to halt the squad and studied the terrain ahead, where thin smoke rose above the tree line, like a gray finger pointing towards something terrible. Could be raiders. Private Sujin Han muttered from behind her, adjusting the heavy pack on her shoulders with obvious discomfort. They have been hitting transport ships all month. Yuna nodded and signaled for the squad to move forward in tactical formation, spreading out through the ash trees while keeping visual contact with each other. The Valkyrie were insectoid beings that stood 3 meters tall with armor-like exoskeletons and compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not imagine. And they had kept their borders sealed for centuries before the recent conflicts forced interaction with other species. Humans had maintained tense neutrality with the Valkyrie Dominion through careful diplomacy and the understanding that neither side wanted the bloodshed that open war would bring. The wreckage came into view through the skeletal trees, and Yuna felt her stomach tighten at the sight of the burning transport vessel scattered across a wide clearing. This was no ordinary craft, she realized as they approached with weapons raised, because the hull bore markings she recognized from intelligence briefings as belonging to the Fulgent of the Valkyrie Royal Fleet. "Everyone stay sharp," she ordered quietly, scanning the perimeter for survivors or threats while the flames consumed what remained of the elegant alien vessel. The attack had been thorough and brutal, leaving nothing but twisted metal and spreading fires that turned the ash forest into something resembling the stories of ancient Earth's underworld. Minjun moved to examine the wreckage while Sujin and the others established a defensive perimeter around the crash site. "Raiders for certain," Minjun reported after a moment, pointing to blast patterns on the hull that matched known pirate weaponry. "They hit the engines first and then finished off the survivors." Yuna walked through the debris field with growing unease, knowing that any attack on a Valkyrie royal vessel would bring consequences that could shatter the fragile peace on this world. The Valkyrie did not forgive, and they did not forget, and they would hunt whoever was responsible across the entire galaxy, if necessary. A sound reached her ears through the crackling of flames, something high-pitched and strange that made her freeze in place with her weapon raised toward a pile of wreckage near the tree line. "Did you hear that?" she asked Minjun, who had joined her with his scanner running continuous sweeps of the area. "Negative," he replied. But then the sound came again, and this time they both turned toward its source with shared concern on their faces. Yuna approached the wreckage slowly, pushing aside a piece of twisted hull metal that had formed a small sheltered space beneath it like an accidental refuge. What she found there made her breath catch in her throat, and her heart began pounding against her ribs. A Valkyrie larva huddled in the shadows, roughly the size of a human toddler, with an iridescent shell that had not yet hardened into adult armor, and compound eyes that reflected her face in fractured patterns. The creature was wounded, bleeding a substance like liquid copper from a gash along its side, and it trembled with fear as Yuna stared down at it. "Sergeant, we should go," Minjun said urgently from behind her. "If there are survivors, the Valkyrie will send warriors to retrieve them, and we do not want to be here when they arrive." Yuna knew he was right, knew that protocol demanded she report this finding and withdraw immediately to avoid any incident that could be misinterpreted as aggression. But the larva made that sound again, like breaking glass mixed with birdsong, and she saw in those strange alien eyes something that transcended species and language. Fear. She recognized pure and simple terror that any child would feel when hurt and alone and surrounded by strangers. "It is just a baby," she said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening, while the larva pressed itself further into its shelter. "It is a Valkyrie," Sujin countered, having abandoned her position to see what had captured their attention. "Their young are trained as warriors from hatching, and even the smallest can produce venom strong enough to kill." Yuna did not move, studying the trembling creature with growing determination forming in her chest like a slow fire building strength. "Look at it," she said, gesturing toward the obvious wound and the way the larva shook with each breath. "Does that look like a warrior to you?" The larva's wings had not yet formed, existing only as small buds along its back that would someday carry it through the skies of its homeworld, and its limbs were too thin and delicate for combat. This was a child, nothing more and nothing less. And Yuna could not walk away from a child no matter what species it belonged to. "Sergeant, our orders are clear," Minjun reminded her with obvious discomfort. "We report and withdraw. And we do not engage with Velkari nationals under any circumstances. Yuna reached slowly toward the larva, keeping her movements gentle and predictable while speaking in soft tones that she hoped conveyed peace, even if the words meant nothing. "It is okay," she murmured. "I am not going to hurt you, little one." The larva watched her with those fractured compound eyes, and something in its posture shifted from pure terror to something that might have been curiosity or perhaps desperate hope when her hand came close enough. The creature did something that would change the course of galactic history. Though none of them could know it in that moment, it reached toward her with trembling limbs and made a sound that needed no translation. The universal cry of a frightened child seeking comfort and safety. Yuna picked it up. The larva was lighter than she expected, its shell smooth and warm against her arms as it pressed itself against her chest and continued making those soft sounds of distress. "Sergeant, this is a mistake," Sujin warned. But her voice had lost some of its certainty as she watched the alien child cling to their squad leader like any human toddler would cling to a parent. "Maybe," Yuna admitted, adjusting her hold on the creature to support its wounded side more gently. "But I am not leaving it here to die." A sound echoed across the mountains in the distance, deep and resonant and unmistakably artificial, and every member of the squad recognized it from their briefings on Volcari military signals. A war horn, used to coordinate search parties and hunting groups across vast distances. "They are coming," Minjin said quietly. And there was no need to specify who he meant. Yuna looked down at the larva in her arms, and its compound eyes that still reflected her face in fractured light, and made a decision that defied every regulation she had sworn to uphold. "Then we need to move," she said, turning toward the forest with the alien child held close against her chest. Now, the squad followed her into the ash trees as the war horn sounded again, closer this time. And somewhere in the mountains, the Velkari were searching for something precious that they had lost. They would not stop until they found it, and Yuna was carrying it straight toward them.